So, glad to see more people joining. Hello, I hope everyone's well in this time of international crisis. We're all here, we're all together, and we'll start the workshop in about 5 minutes. We thought while people are joining, we could do a bit of an icebreaker. Always fun to break the ice. Mickey, do you want to do an icebreaker for us quickly, or shall I? Shall I do it myself? Mickey just wrote to me with a suggestion of an icebreaker. He said, "Just name where they're from." The classic Some of You question: where are you from? Yeah, I mean, we can just do that. We can start introducing ourselves.
So, as Olaf suggests, I'm gonna introduce a little bit myself while we are waiting everyone to join into the meeting. My name is Mickey, and I'm currently here from Budapest. So nice to meet you all.
Nice. You couldn't tell you in Budapest. You have a fabulous UJS high-tech green screen. Welcome to the 21st century, everybody. Nice one. Thanks, Mickey. Anyone volunteers to go next? Break the ice. Come on, break that ice. Let's do it.
I can do it. Olaf.
Yes.
I got you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sammy.
I'm Sammy, and usually I stay. I was born and raised in Vienna. Right now in Brussels, but I'm not in Brussels. I'm actually outside of Vienna. I'm in Burgenland. But right now, because of the Corona crisis, we're all back in our home countries. And I'm also working for EUGS as the Union Outreach Officer. And yes, that's it, I think.
Do you have any particular hobbies or things you do on the side, which might be related to the seminar sessions that we're just launching?
So good that you asked, Olaf. I'm also responsible for the social media of EUGS, so that's why I'm joining. Maybe I can gain more knowledge with this seminar. Yeah.
Great. I like your champagne bottles in there as well. Enjoy responsibly. Anyone else wants to go next and give himself a brief intro? Tell us who you are. Yes, Josefa, your time to shine.
So hi, yeah, my name is Josefa. I'm originally from Germany, where I'm also at my home right now, and I am volunteering for EUJS right now. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Do you want to name us one most inspiring story of what EUJS got you to do?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
That's fine, because we're going to have more people introducing now. I was going to ask you for an inspiring story from EUJS, inspire us, but yeah. Cool. So I guess we're going to start the seminar properly. Do Bini to start this off?
Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot, Olaf. My name is Bini Goodman. I'm the president of the European Union of Jewish Students. And for all of us, this is a very hard and very challenging time, a time that we have never experienced before and experiences that we were not expecting to have. It's very important, as you all know, as you're all aware, to engage in social see each other, that we cannot engage meaningfully with each other, and that we cannot learn from each other. And that is basically the idea behind our new web session series. So starting with today, starting with this great session from Olaf, topic self-help and everything that you can on Jewish learning, of course, and everything that you can imagine to keep you engaged, to keep delivering meaningful content to you, and most importantly, to make sure that we keep the sense of community that makes UGS as great as it is. So without further ado, Olaf, please let's start with our web session series.
So here we go. This is the official start of the EUJS webinar series. Thank you so much for joining. I know it's a difficult time for us all, and we don't quite know what's happening, and it's a bit of madness at the moment with the developing and unpredictable coronavirus story. So I appreciate your time that you joined us. We're going to keep it short and sweet, and basically in the next half an hour, we'll try to go over a media strategy, different approaches to how to approach print media, conventional media, broadcast, but also social media, and we'll try to keep it really short as just a bare bones introduction. And then if you have any more questions, then I can answer some at the end. And I can also do a follow-up session if this goes well. And if you're interested in knowing more about a specific field, like we can do one just about radio, or we can do just about new media or whatever. But I think firstly, I'd like to hear from each of you just a sentence on what you'd like to get out of this webinar, maybe, and what you're particularly interested in when it comes to media, and maybe what are some of the challenges that you've had in your time as an activist or as a student leader. So if someone just wants to start over, like literally just one sentence saying kind of what you want to get out from this. Do I see any faces? Just so I know what you're expecting and what I should kind of go on. And if nobody wants to talk, I can just go straight to my makeshift slide. Does anyone want to say something? All right, cool. Well, in that case, what I'll do is I'll share my screen with you and basically show the 10 slides that I've made. I just made these slides today, 1 hour ago, so they're very basic. I didn't have much time to prepare this session, but it's just kind of slides just to help you see what I'm talking about. Right, let me share my screen. Hold on. Right, okay, I can see that. And I'm just gonna share this. Cool. So basically, media landscape tends to be divided into sort of 3 streams. We've got the conventional media, which has been the sort of dominant way of creating narratives and conveying messages, and obviously daily newspapers is a big factor. That divides into sort of broadsheets, so kind of respectable papers that talk a lot about politics and about public life, and are quite kind of respected as fact-providing, objective papers. A lot of them might have specific opinions, and then there's tabloids as well, which are more about quick messages, appealing to people that maybe don't have as much time to digest the depth of the news, are a bit more focused on sort of reactive stories, quite human driven as well. Tabloids tend to have obviously quite a lot of stories about individual kind of crises or surprises that people went through. Anyway, you guys all know what broadsheets and tabloids are. I'm not going to spend hours on talking about different types of papers. Obviously, we've got magazines, and these tend to be much more specialized. We've obviously got like news-focused magazines, which are about wrapping up the week and sort of showing what are some of the key things, and showing a digest of different papers from all around the world. So we've got Newsweek and Time and The Week in the UK, and The Economist is a new weekly now. And there's also specialist magazines, right, which are obviously within the Jewish community, but you also have different kind of political magazines of different streams, left and right. You have different, not just community magazines, but interest and hobby related, etc. And then of course you have broadcast, and that's a whole different landscape, which involves TV and radio, and there's a massive divide between like local, national, who owns the station, is it public, is it private, what kind of interest, private. And social media obviously is massively important. We'll try to go more about the conventional media in this webinar, and maybe do social media next time. And then new media is something that really has started to come through in the recent decade, really, where things started as sort of blogs and people writing about their very niche experience on something, and they were very much focused as like forums and chats where people could contribute and create the news themselves. It was very kind of bottom up, very grassroots. And new media, I suppose Huffington Post, you could include that as a new medium. BuzzFeed is actually more read than a third of all the broadsheet newspapers in Europe in terms of clicks. And that doesn't mean that people get more meaningful content out of this, but in terms of pure clicks, BuzzFeed has read more than the third of all the newspapers put together in Europe. And new media is something, again, to look out for. It's a massively diverse landscape, and it's very difficult to to talk about it in just half an hour. But basically, when you're reaching out to the media, you have two types of ways in which you reach out. You've got obviously proactive, where you say plan a campaign, or you have a launch of an event series like this one, or you have a motion at university that you've just passed. Basically something that you know is going to happen, something that you're planning in advance for, and something that you know is going to happen on a certain date, right? So for example, if you have a conference that's going to have this and this speaker, and you're going to have this and this agenda, and you know about it already 2 months before, it's probably a good idea to start drafting a release and a press pack already then, and adding more details sort of as you go along. And the whole point of like proactive releases is to set the agenda, to kind of, you bring your own viewpoint out there, you bring your own agenda out there. With proactive kind of outreach, you usually have to appeal to more like local newspapers at first, and people and outlets that are more community based, just because, if you try to reach out straight to the national media from the start, you're usually going to get drowned out in the tons of press releases that everyone gets. An average journalist on a news desk is going to probably receive about 500 to 1,000 press releases a day, and that's going to be from all sorts of NGOs, interest groups, pressure groups. So you have to really start local, and I can't emphasize this enough. Building relationships with local editors and local journalists is so important, because once you start getting coverage in a local paper, that could be just from your town or just from your region, you build up a press coverage list and a reputation that can sort of ladder you up to the national coverage, right? And it's also much easier to reach out to local journalists, because a lot of the time they're proactively looking for stories, and in local newspapers you often have request boxes at the bottom of a website, or you have emails where specifically they're asking you to provide them with stories. Also, it tends to be the case that national press doesn't really cover positive like NGO work massively, right? Obviously most stories are negative, dominated by kind of reactive, responsive coverage to crises, right? So if you want to get a proactive story about an event that you're doing in the community, or about some sort of cool initiative or a coalition that you're building, it's usually quite difficult, because one, it's not relevant to a story that's already developing, and two, usually people want something that's a bit negative and sensationalist, and so that's why it's good to start with sort of local specialist outlets and build these relationships from the bottom. The bottom line is that national newspapers sell a lot of papers, not by sort of writing stories about wonderful work that's going on, but about creating controversy. But obviously, when there are some controversies, for example, with like what we had with the Labour anti-Semitism crisis in the UK, or what we have with the Uyghur situation right now, when there are developing stories that are quite deep and there's many knots of complication, the controversial, they're constantly developing, it's not just a one-off, then reactive stories are a good idea to get seen. A reactive press release or reactive outreach is basically about your organization offering a comment on what's going on from your angle, right? From how your community sees what's going on, how it impacts you, and what you're calling for, like what you want to change, what you want to be done differently. Yeah, I mean, I want you to like ask questions, by the way, and because I don't really want it to be just like a lecture. Ideally, I want to sort of hear from you what your experiences are of the media. As someone who works in the media right now, works with press and broadcast, I know quite a bit of theory about it, but at the same time, I also want to speak from experience, right? And I want to hear your experiences. So if you have anything to say, or any particular story that you're working on now, and you'd like to hear from me about how you can get it into the media, how you can attract journalists' attention, just ask me. Just put your microphone on and start speaking. Right. So print media, I'm going to focus a lot on that because this workshop's mainly about conventional media, and social is for next time, potentially. Basically, there are 4 main types of content that you produce when you appeal to print, right? The press release is probably the most used one, the standard one, where you just have a general inbox mailing list, or you mass email lots of different outlets that you want to pitch to. And it's usually quite short. A press release is usually up to a page, usually 4 or 5 paragraphs, keeping it really short, about 30 words per paragraph, straight to the point. And it usually consists of, you know, sort of quick preamble, 2 paragraphs of what your organization is doing, what you're calling for, why it's relevant, and then a quote, right? I'll go through more detail on that. Feature stories and op-eds are basically, you know, 500, 600 to 1,000 words, and they're usually like op-eds are first person, right? So UJS has had quite a lot of success with publishing op-eds on the We campaign and before, and that's basically usually if you're in a position of leadership, but also if you have an interesting story to tell in general, if you've been through a particularly interesting experience or whatever, like you can just write an op-ed from your personal experience and discuss an issue in sort of more depth, more detail. A feature story is more where you get to open up the work of your organization to the audience, and it's not first person. It's basically just you describing, for example, how Summer U went, or how this conference that you organized went. And you try to have quotes from different sort of people. You try to look at the broader and the longer sort of story of your organization, like how did you get here, what's next, and it's more of an overview kind of thing. Whereas an op-ed, you're talking more about a particular phenomenon, one issue at a given point of time, and you write it from a first person perspective, right? And then the easiest way to start with the media and the easiest way to get noticed is by writing letters to editors, right? You know, when you look for papers, they usually have a section on towards the end or far middle, where there's usually like a whole page of comments where people can send in their responses to what they've read in previous papers, or you know, even to other letters, right? People write letters and the next day you can respond to a letter that you've seen and basically generate a discussion, right? You usually have a high chance of getting published in that, especially if you reached out in the morning, because letter editors usually start sort of working from 9 a.m. Most letters start flooding in quite late because it's people responding to the online articles that usually get put up in the morning. So what I've written a couple of editor letters when I was a student, when I was presiding over the Aberdeen JSOC, about the campaigns that we've done. And basically what we've done is we've always sent the letters to the editor right in the morning so that we could be on top of our list. And like in the mornings, they just want to fill up the section, so they tend to take a bit more kind of one. But yeah, usually it's just a short kind of 100, 200 words, quite a short comment on something that you've seen in the paper, just a discussion point. I know. Cool, so I suppose the big question is, once you have a story, once you think about, you know, what you want to communicate and what the purpose of that is, who do you actually reach out to, right? I would say reach out to as many people as possible, especially when it's the first time. I'd say 15 or 20 is usually a norm before you even get the first response. And, you know, if you're new out there on the block, if it's a new union or a new project and you haven't had previous relationships with those journalists, you've got to just keep on pushing. I'd say it's good to start local, as I said, and, you know, reach out to and pitch to local journalists, but also to national, to TV, to broadcast, like basically as many emails as you can find, as many contacts, just send it out and then see kind of who's the most responsive, who's interested, is anyone asking for a follow-up call, whatever. I also think the online-based media, which is massively growing, print is decreasing and online is going up, and many newspapers are actually, you know, taking their operations off the print in general and going online only, like The Independent in the UK. They stopped printing papers like 5 years ago and they're online only, and the numbers are massively going up. The good thing about online like news outlets is that they tend to publish a lot more, right? The volume of what they publish is not limited to the amount of pages that they have to print. So they often have blog sections as well, where they don't have very strict editorial guidelines, and when they have basically limited space. So Times of Israel, anyone can basically set up a blog account, anyone can start writing, and you just send it to them. It goes through the standard kind of editorial process, and then you can get it published. It's the same with Huffington Post. They do a blog section as well. Medium is another website where anyone can basically submit an op-ed or a feature, and it usually gets published. These are high volume websites where there's thousands of articles published each day. And while it may not be read by that many people, it builds up a portfolio for you to then say, when you pitch to the national press or to broadcast media, to say, look, I was published in this and this and this and this. And it doesn't matter how big it was or how many people read it. The more outlets you've been published in, the easier it is then to get the credibility that you need to get onto the national sort of paper scene, right? And then I suppose the important part is as well, finding the right time to pitch your story, right? Because that makes a massive impact. Firstly, if it's a proactive story about an event that you're organizing or policy that you're developing or whatever, you should plan it and write the body of it way in advance. And then when things change, you can keep adding to it. You can keep adding new quotes, new stats, whatever you find. But ideally, you want to send out a proactive piece like 2 or 3 weeks before you want it published. Features editors usually have lots and lots in their schedules in advance. They often work with NGOs and kind of industry bodies who provide them entire press packs, often a month or earlier before the release. So it's good to just send it out and say, look, I'm looking to get this published in sort of 2 or 3 weeks. I wonder if you have space in the calendar. Yeah. I also found, just from my experience in the UK media, and this is entirely just from my experience, that the first half of the week works so much better. I don't know why that is really. It could be maybe just because the journalists are a bit more enthusiastic in the first part of the week and want to be a bit more proactive in finding stories and having a diverse range of things. But it tends to be the case that sort of Tuesdays and Wednesdays are just really good for getting published. Like, it's just just an anecdote. Usually avoid mornings when you send a pitch email, because that's when there are editor meetings, and usually these things will just get lost in the avalanche and get lost in the crowd. So you don't really want to be sending a pitch email in the morning. You don't really want to be sending a pitch email in the late afternoon, because it's just going to get really crowded and busy. So the sweet spot, I suppose, for sending your pitch email to a journalist is kind of 11, 12, late morning, early afternoon kind of thing. And also, if you want to publish your column or an op-ed, a feature story, weekend papers are great for that, because they have a lot more volume. Usually they tend to publish a much broader range of topics, and rather than covering just the kind of developing weekly news that are happening very fast and fast-paced, they tend to be more kind of human interest driven, right? So weekend papers are all about exposing different parts of the community. Like, just weekend papers are good for the type of organizations that we lead. Yeah, so where to find the journalists, that's really difficult. And I know as a past student leader that, yes, you can write as much as you want. You can write a really good press release that you can be very happy with, but who do you actually reach out to? I think that's often the big challenge. Like, I think Twitter has helped massively, because all journalists are basically on Twitter. And even if you don't really want to tweet and use Twitter much, I suggest you get a Twitter account just so you can find journalists and keep Twitter lists of the journalists that you want to approach. That is so essential. Basically, when you start a Twitter list, you can make it private so that nobody else sees which journalists you are targeting. It saves you from having to follow them, and you can keep them all at once, so you can see what kind of stories they're writing about, what they're interested in, what they're retweeting, and even kind of see what they're posting about. So when you write a pitch email and when you contact a certain journalist, you can allude to something that they posted on Twitter, something that's happening in their life, something they're interested in, and basically just build that personal rapport by having that personal dimension there. So I use Twitter lists for lots of things, and I even split it into several lists. So I've got a Twitter list for broadcast journalists. I've got a Twitter list for just Scottish journalists. I have another one for people that only do weekend columns. Basically, when you read papers and when you look at online news sites, see who's writing what, see what kind of types of things they're interested in, and just put it all together in a list. That usually works really well. It's also best to approach journalists directly, not just news desks, because basically all journalists have access to a news desk, the general news submission email. But there's so many hundreds of things, and they often don't get forwarded to the right people, that it just gets lost in the crowd. So I think if you can find contact for a journalist, send it to them directly. Now, how can you find a contact journalist? Usually you have it at the bottom of a website of the paper or the magazine that you're pitching to. You can also use this, you can also use Control F, so if you're on any sort of website, you can just Control F and look for an email. And yeah, there's lots of ways. Twitter is usually the best place. So again, if you look at the name of who writes what, you can try to find them on Twitter. And you can also see what kind of email addresses there are on websites. For example, if you see someone's email as john.smith@bbc.co.uk, you see that this is the format of the names that people have. So you're just gonna, right, cool. Basically, this is the important bit. Pitching your story and what things to keep in mind, what are some of those key principles, right? One, when you pitch a story, ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen, right? Before you make the call, before you write that email, just set your mind on a test and think, I might as well just try it. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to set the expectation that I may not get an answer, but what's going to happen? At the very worst, a journalist isn't going to be interested, but at least you tried. And the fact that you're proactive shows that you're enthusiastic, and it's going to keep you in the back of their minds, right? So again, from my experience, you often get 4 or 5 rejections from a journalist or a news desk before you approach them, not because they don't like what you wrote. It's often because it just gets lost in the barrage of the amount of stuff that comes through their inbox. There's so much, a lot of the time, junk coming through inboxes of journalists that you just have to keep trying and pushing. And the one thing that discourages so many people is, they didn't reply to my pitch email, or didn't get back to me when I phoned them and they said they would. So that means that my story is bad. That's not true. You have to keep on trying. That's really, really important. And then the second part, once you actually reach out to a journalist, and when they offer you something, and when they say, okay, we're interested in publishing a story in 2 weeks, send us this, that's how long we want it to be, etc. That's when the time actually comes to write your story and to send it, right? But however interesting you think your story is, it's not going to cut it in the media if it's not relatable to the people who read it, right? So you have to think, well, what kind of audience is reading the outlet that I'm pitching to? Is it a largely left-wing paper? Is it a right-wing paper? Is it quite a young readership? Is it based in cities? Is it quite specific to a certain community? Is it kind of mainstream? Is it specialist? You have to think about all these things and try to basically create a persona of a reader, right? Try to imagine who's behind that screen and who's behind that paper, and act like you're speaking to them, right? You're not just broadcasting a wider message, but you're trying to speak to them in the voice that you think they would like to be spoken in. Basically ask yourself, why do people need to know this? How is it going to benefit them, and how is it going to change their day? I think another thing, be on target. So basically when you target journalists or broadcast people, kind of make sure that you, again, speak to them in the way that they want to be spoken, like approach different journalists in different ways. A lot of the time a phone call works better if you spoke to a journalist once. Yeah, just basically be flexible in how you approach people. Know your story inside out, because you might often get a call after your email as a follow-up, and people might ask you more detail about the stats in your story or about what exactly you're saying, and you need to, yeah, you basically need to always give them the right data and the right information when you're asked, right? If you give them the wrong number or wrong stat, they won't be impressed, and that's going to give you a bad reputation. Make it personal. Again, do your research on what just interested in, what they talked about. You know, there's a lot of big egos in journalism, and flattery never hurts. So yeah, basically relate to things that they've shown interest in, and you know what they want to hear. Have a complete story as possible, so that includes having pictures, having stats. You always need to have a quote in a press release. Try to have case studies. Try to basically have as much of a package as possible, so that it leaves less work for a journalist to complete the gaps. They might not have space for your story or not have time in a particular issue, so, but that doesn't have to be the end of the road. Like, think, you know, could you maybe write something for them? If they can't take a press release, could you write something for them as an op-ed in the future? Or can you send them a video or like an audio recording that they can use for their online platform? Try to make proactive suggestions on, you know, if they can't take your content in a form that you propose, maybe there's a different way, right? Like most papers have multimedia platforms that they use, etc. And exclusives, God, time's running out. It's past already, so I guess I'm going to touch on that later. Basically, if you offer an op-ed or a press release as an exclusive, then you have to keep that exclusivity, right? You don't want to offer it to other papers, and you don't want to see another paper running the story the day before the paper that you promised it to as an exclusive, because that just breach of trust. It's going to put you on a blacklist, and nobody wants to see this. Pitching email, we're running out of time, so basically I'll stop here because we don't want to keep it too long, and I know that I'm talking talking quite fast. There's quite a lot of content in here. It's difficult to squeeze it into a half-an-hour session, but if you have any questions about a specific, if you'd like to ask me anything about what you're working on, basically these last 10 minutes, if we can wait, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen. Stop sharing my screen. That's it. Stop sharing. Oh, where's my mouse? Oh, I love it. I can't find my cursor anymore. Beanie is requesting remote control of your screen. Dude, I can't find my cursor. Stop that. All right, cool. bit of a hiccup there. Right. That's it from me for now. I had absolutely no time to cover everything I wanted to say. Basically, if you have any specific questions, then it's easier for me to talk about them, because yeah, it's difficult to sort of squeeze it all in a lecture. There's so much specificities in media relations, and there's so many kind of nuances in there that I think it would just be more helpful if you guys ask questions or leave your, yeah. Cool, but that was my very brief, bare bones, half of an introduction. If you're interested, then I can send you my PowerPoint and I can send you what I've got. It's a very bare PowerPoint, so I can build it up a little bit and send it to you when it's a bit more complete, or I can send it to you as it is, whatever you prefer. You can obviously message me on WhatsApp as well. You can, or you can ask now if you want, if anyone has any questions or any particular stories that you are interested in. No, cool. Well,
thank you very much, Olaf. At this point, I would normally give you a box of Belgian chocolates, as we do as an UGS tradition. This is unfortunately impossible in those times of social distancing, but I will give you a piece of Belgian chocolate the next time we see each other in person after this is over. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope it was interesting. This was our first web session, so you were very much part of an experiment. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm just going to make a little plug for our upcoming sessions. Because we have lots of them and lots of very cool sessions. Tomorrow, we're going to have a community candle lighting and a discussion with Ephraim Kant. Motzei Shabbat on Saturday, we're going to have a virtual Havdalah together with Base Berlin. And after that, Sammy is going to take you on a summer U party in your living room. On Sunday, you're going to hear a bunch of Alte Kaka speak about UGS throughout the ages and the moving times UGS has been through in the past. On Monday, we're going to start our Union Leaders in Conversation series, and we are very happy to welcome Simone Santoro, who's the president of the Italian Union of Jewish Students. And on Tuesday, the highlight, my personal highlight so far, a member of the European Parliament, Sergei Lagodinsky, is going to join us for an insight in how it is to work in the European Parliament as an MEP and how the European Parliament fights anti-Semitism. So stay tuned, follow us on social media, and most importantly, stay at home. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.